Super Tuesday brought a major win for Bernie Sanders in Colorado, at least on paper, as many Democratic caucus events saw huge turnouts, even rivaling 2008 numbers. On the Republican side, wins by the top three candidates made more pundits speculate that the GOP may be headed towards a brokered convention. Patty, the headlines after Super Tuesday in Colorado were all about the long lines outside of Democratic caucuses, people around the block, some people couldn't get in. Many people remember 2008, but it seemed to get into a lot of frustration, too, of like, well, I couldn't get in, I couldn't do my thing, so now I want a primary. Where's this going to go by the time we vote again in 2020?
I think we'll probably go to a primary. Remember, we've had primaries before. We went back to the caucus system. People have they've generally been very, very sleepy. And in some ways, the Colorado Republican caucus was sleepy because they didn't do the straw poll, so they were just electing people to the convention. So you couldn't actually say what Republican presidential candidate they went for. Denver might be the greatest place to live in, but I would say we get a C- with the caucus system. People want to participate in the process. They should have known just by the number of registrations that came in, by the January 4th deadline, by the feel the burn intensity, that these were going to have big turnouts. And the traffic was a nightmare. I know at least 10 people who couldn't get in. And they were all over town on the different caucuses because they were just so crowded. A lot of interest is a good problem. The inability to accommodate those people is a big problem. And I think we will see a lot of changes in both political parties and how we do the caucus. But, I mean, it just gets better, this presidential campaign. Who doesn't want to pay attention to it? Who wouldn't want to have gone to the caucus and see what's going on?
That's very true. Mike, if the Republicans did have a straw poll, it's all speculation at this point. There's no official numbers here, but where do you feel Colorado Republicans would have gone, and could that have changed some of the narrative of Super Tuesday?
Well, that's a really good question because if you remember back in 2012, what happened at the Democratic caucus this year with the straw poll, a similar thing happened in 2012 with the Ron Paul supporters. Just by talking to like the Bernie Sanders canvasser who came to my house, that there were people registering Democrat for the first time, or who were registered Democrats and never been involved, who were showing up to try and stack the deck in the caucus for Bernie Sanders, just like in 2012. The Ron Paul kids tried to take over. And I was at the Denver Republican gathering in 2012, and it was raucous, and you'd have thought that you were at a rock concert. I mean, it really was interesting. So who knows what would have happened this year? But I have a feeling it probably would have ended up looking like a lot like the other states looked. That it would have been Cruz, Rubio, and Trump falling somewhere in there. And so that's really and truly, I don't know that it would have made any difference with regard to who the delegates or who might end up going to the convention. The only thing that really matters now is that instead of kind of these decisions being made by the million-plus registered Republicans, it'll be made by the 300,000 people who get to have a say in the convention, the national convention. So if it's a brokered convention, the GOP decision to not have the straw poll will probably look like thoughtful foresight.
I can't imagine anyone describing thoughtful foresight at the GOP convention.
That's the only reason it'll be considered thoughtful forethought. That if it turns out that that it could have stopped Trump from getting to the level where it was his, then they'll look like they made a very poor choice.
Eric, it seems that the argument, at least we're hearing so far, against the primary system is that it wouldn't give parties enough of the power and a way to tap some of that energy. We see these lines around blocks and people want to get really excited. For primaries, you walk up, you vote, you go home. Do you think there's enough momentum after a frustrating day like this for primaries in Colorado?
Yes, I do. The question is whether it will just be presidential primaries, which I think are coming, or whether it will be a full, somewhat repudiation or at least changeover from the caucus system to more of a primary system. And we may well have a ballot measure this year as well, being pushed by the Denver Chamber of Commerce and others, to open that whole process, whether it be a caucus process or a primary process, to unaffiliated voters, to go to an open system instead of the current closed system we have. credit to all those people who turned out for particularly the Democratic caucuses, which were a little more consequential here in Colorado this year than the Republican. But you still have to ask yourself, is that the right way of doing it? Colorado was a complete non-factor, non-story in terms of National Super Tuesday. At 7 p.m., when all the other states were reporting and it was this national focus of interest, the Colorado system was just starting. People were just starting to assemble and get in line and sign in, and by the time you had results, it was completely after the fact, and as I said, a non-factor in the national dialogue. Yes, it gave Bernie Sanders one more win to delay the inevitable what that appears to be coming on the Democratic side, but nonetheless, on the Republican side, I mean, your question about a brokered convention. That's the best the alternatives to Donald Trump can hope for at this time. No one other than Donald Trump, in my mind, has the prospect of walking into Cleveland with 1,237 delegates. The question is, can you stop him from having that? We will probably know soon enough. If Kasich can hold serve in Ohio, if Rubio can hold serve or regain serve in Florida, then there's a realistic prospect because those are winner take all, and then there becomes a realistic prospect of keeping Trump under that magic number, and you have to keep him well under that magic number. If he goes in with 1,200, he'll figure out a way to get 37 more. You need to keep him probably to 1,000 to 1,100, somewhere in that range, and then it is all holes barred and all bets off in terms of what happens in a brokered convention. We haven't seen that in our lifetime.
Natasha, back to the Democrats here in Colorado. You have a lot of the energy around the caucus events. This really was for Bernie Sanders. I mean, there's some Hillary supporters out there, obviously, but the energy was coming from Bernie. If Hillary gets the nomination, as all the math really points to, especially get to talk about superdelegates, will those Bernie supporters, especially in Colorado, be energy for Hillary in the general election, or do they just go away?
I don't think they go away, but I think saying that they'd be energized for Hillary might be going too far. More likely, they'll just vote for, okay, she's the default. And I think that's part of the problem that she's having across the country, and certainly, obviously, in Colorado. I think one of the things that disturbed me about about Tuesday is it feels like voters in Colorado are almost disenfranchised. I mean, you have to be able to set away 2 to 3 hours of your night to go and feel the burn for Bernie or Hillary. If you have kids, that becomes very hard. If you have disabilities, that becomes very hard. If you have an hourly wage job, that becomes very hard. And I worry about if what we saw on Tuesday, that Bernie support is indicative of the full party there, or if we're just getting a very small snapshot of who was passionate enough to make the arrangements for childcare or time off from work or whatever else. And until we figure that out, I think we're going to be missing out on a larger discussion of politics here, particularly since Tuesday also discussed the Denver DA race, which is a huge topic. And while names didn't necessarily fall off the ballot for June, this is a campaign that people need to be hearing about. And this was the first opportunity for many voters to have a chance to hear about what these candidates are planning to do in that office. So in the midst of all this sort of scuffle, the long lines, standing by trees and things like that, we still miss out on what we were there for, which was to learn more about the candidates both nationally and locally.